I'm Kent, and you're watching Weekend Adventure Rides. This week we're taking on this factory exhaust from the XR250. We're gonna clean it up and get this thing looking good, ready to go back on the bike. Don't go anywhere. All right, so this is the factory exhaust. It's off the 1995 XR250. It's looking a little rusty. Definitely not in any shape to be put on this bike. So what we're gonna do is use a variety of sanding tools on the drill and wire wheels. We're gonna take all of the old paint and corrosion off here. Then we're going to paint it with this header paint. And then finally, I'm gonna wrap it with some exhaust wrap. I think that's really gonna look nice with the style and idea that I have for this bike. The other thing we're gonna do, one of Gordon's mods, is to grind this weld at the end of the header here. So as it goes into the exhaust, there's a weld, and it kind of impedes flow a little bit. So we'll use the Dremel tool, we'll get in there, we'll grind that back down so that the exhaust is flowing well with the aftermarket muffler that I'm gonna put on here. All right, let's get started. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get the exhaust shield off. Just a couple 8mm bolts here. All right, now let's go to work with the drill and the wire wheel first. We've got a good amount of the corrosion off there. There's really just a lot of dirt kind of on the top of these headers. So what I'm gonna do is take some steel wool and get this wet and put some cleaner on here and get this cleaned up with that steel wool. The other thing is, unfortunately, I noticed that there is a dent right here in this tube. So we're gonna heat that up and I'm gonna try to push that out, see if we can correct that a little bit before we paint this and wrap it. All right, so I went through and gave this a good scrubbing with some steel wool, got most of the dirt off. There's a couple spots on here that I couldn't get to, so we're gonna use a big heavy brush here. All right, so this looks pretty well cleaned up for now. I'll come back and do some finish work and make sure that all the dust and dirt's off here before we get any paint on it. But first, I want to address this little dent here. I'm gonna get the propane torch out. We're gonna heat that up, see if we can push that out a little bit straighter before we move on and do anything else. All right, it is moving a little bit. I think I got to get it a little bit hotter, but I've got this 3/4 inch piece of galvanized pipe here. I think this is gonna work a little bit better. All right, well, that's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. So we're gonna let this cool off and then we'll get started on grinding the welds out on the other side. All right, so I've got the Dremel loaded up with a cutting bit, and now we are going to grind these welds out here. And so let's get actually a closer look real quick. All right, so right here on the edge, there's a weld that goes around, and you can see how it's a little bit higher than the inside of this tube. So what we're gonna do is just grind that weld down a little bit right there. All right, I think we've got it right where we want it. We've got all those smoothed out, so there's no longer a lip anymore there. You can see it on both of those, looking pretty good. Opened up. All right, So let's get moved back over. We'll get this finished cleaning up, and then we're gonna get some paint on this. So we've got this cleaned up. We've got all the dirt off of it and then all of the corrosion. So we're gonna go ahead and wipe it down with just a clean rag. And this is just alcohol because I don't have any paint thinner right now, but this will work fine. Okay, so now that we've got it wiped down, I put it on a piece of cardboard here, and then I have this metal etching, metal prep. So we'll use that, and you really don't need very much. You just need to keep it wet for about 15 minutes or so. See if my sprayer's working. There we go. So this will actually convert rust if you were to spray rust with this. It turns into like almost a polymer. And this just helps with adhesion to the metal when we paint it. All right, that looks pretty good. And so we'll let this sit and dry for the next hour or so, and then we'll come back and get set up to paint. Okay, while we wait for that to dry out, let's take care of this heat shield here, get it cleaned up because we're going to paint this as well. All right, so we've got everything prepped. We went through, used a variety of tools, got all of the old rust corrosion off here, a lot of the old paint. So down to bare metal for most of it, sprayed it with the metal prep, and then did the same thing for this exhaust shield, which I didn't actually take all the paint off, but I just dulled it down so the exhaust paint will stick to this just fine. So I got some new clean gloves, and I'm gonna grab a new microfiber cloth with some isopropyl alcohol on it. And we're gonna wipe down all the grease that has collected from even our hands and clean it off these. Now we'll let that alcohol evaporate off there, and I'll go get the can and we'll start shaking it up. So we'll just paint the header here on the table. We'll do a couple light coats, wait for those to dry for about half an hour, flip it over, do a couple more light coats, and it should turn out just fine. Really what we're doing here is just preventing corrosion, because when you wrap an exhaust with the exhaust wrap, it has a tendency to maybe even absorb a little bit of water and then rust out the exhaust. So we're gonna paint it to prevent that. And this flame-proof header stuff is supposed to work for this application. The thing is you have to bake it on, but we're not gonna do that yet because obviously the bike's not running. So we're just gonna ride it and it'll bake on as it goes. So not a big deal. Anyway, get started on this. Come back in 10 minutes and we'll recoat it. So the header paint is actually a lot flatter sheen than what the top cap looks. So I don't like that for the heat shield. So I'm gonna paint that with some engine enamel, which is still high heat rated, but only to 500 degrees, which it's also gloss black, and I think that's gonna look a lot better. So we'll hit that with gloss black instead of the flat. All right, and we'll continue waiting. Allow that to tack up a little bit, and then we'll put another coat on. All right, it's been 10 minutes. Let's put another coat on. Okay, let's go through. We'll put another coat of paint, this time on the other side, wait 10 minutes, and then we'll recoat this side. All right, let's hit both of these one last time and we'll call it good. Looks good. All right, so I'm gonna let these dry overnight, and tomorrow we will wrap the header, and then I'm gonna let this dry, flip it over, paint the other side, but we're gonna let it sit for, you know, at least 10 hours or so before we try to flip it over. I don't want to disturb any of that fresh paint and make it look worse. All right, we have the exhaust painted black and it's looking pretty good. So it's time to wrap this. Now, a few things to consider before you get started. If you look at the exhaust, the header here, there's the larger piece here that actually goes inside the motor. So we don't want to wrap that. Also, I have painted the exhaust clamp pieces and we want those to fit snugly on this exhaust, so we can't wrap that portion of it either. And so what we're gonna do is put those pieces on, kind of fit them on there and get an idea of where we can wrap to. Now, this has a big enough hole, this exhaust clamp here, that we can actually wrap inside that so that we're not having any breaks in the wrap where you can actually see the header. But we don't want these to be in contact with the wrap. We want them in contact and snugly fit to the header. So what we're gonna do, I've got an idea of where we want the wrap to start. And I'm just gonna mark that with a pen here. All right, and we'll mark both of those. And I'm just using one of the collars to mark where we're gonna start, just at the edge of that. Now, before you just jump in and start wrapping, you want to make sure you put some gloves on because this has fiberglass in it and it's going to get all over your hands. And then if you touch any part of your body, then it's going to be just crazy itchy. So make sure you put some gloves on and then don't touch your face. Okay, so this is a 2-inch black wrap. And ideally, I'd like to take this all the way to each individual one all the way to the end of the header here. There's a small gap here, so we might run into some trouble here and have to wrap it, both of them, from this point on. But I think it's gonna look a lot better if we can get it all the way back to here. So I'm gonna try my best to do that. And then we'll double it up at this point and then wrap this whole thing, not cover up these bolt holes so that we can put the exhaust cover back on. I think that's gonna look pretty good. And we'll go all the way back to the edge of this collar here and leave this open so that the new slip-on muffler is going to fit on there just fine. Okay, so we'll try to get started with this here. And I almost forgot, one thing that you're going to need is a good pair of scissors. These are just kitchen shears, so they'll be able to cut this fiberglass. And then I've got some stainless wraps or ties here to hold the wrap down. All right, let's get you guys a little bit closer. All right, first off, I'm going to cut this so that we have an even edge that's not frayed. So we'll get rid of that end piece. And then I'm just going to start wrapping carefully, keeping in mind where those collars are going to go. And we want like somewhere around 50% overlap, and try to keep that continuous because that's just going to look better and provide some protection. I really like doing the exhaust wraps. It gives you kind of like a grungy, classic feel to these bikes. You can see the fiberglass on my hands, those gloves. Make sure you wear gloves. Try to keep it as tight as you can. Okay, we're to the hard part now. I'm gonna unwind this roll real quick. Little bridge in the roll. That's okay. I think this is going to be more than enough. Probably right where I needed to cut it off anyway. So we'll keep working around. We're getting close to the end here. This might be the last pass through, and then we're going to use one of those ties. All right. So that is one side of the header there. Okay, and I'm going to trim this so that our edge is on the back side so you can't see it whenever you're looking at the bike. So we'll trim the edge here. All right, so that is one side all wrapped up there. Looks pretty good. Tried to keep that consistent, like half overlap, which can be a little bit more difficult whenever you have these tight bends, but you'll figure it out. And we will continue on with side number 2. Any of the little edges or frayed pieces you can just trim off.
Okay, let's see if we can get through this small space here and keep this wrap going without having to cover up both of these headers. I really would like to keep them separate. I think that's going to look a lot better. I'm going to wrap it around and then try to slide it along the edge here and see if I can get it to go down there along that other side. Yeah, I think that's going to work actually. Oh yeah, that's going to work. Sweet. So we'll keep working it that way. Okay, looks like one more time through and then we are there. Actually, we're able to get both of those wrapped separately, so I think that looks really good. Now, I'm gonna cut this one off, put another tie on there. The seam is to the back, and I kind of want to keep the seam to the back on these zip ties as well. Looks good. I'm gonna trim all of the excess wrap off both sides of this, and then maybe put a couple more zip ties on there. Now we want to wrap this, but we don't want to cover up these bolt holes. What I may do with that one is just have to poke a hole in it and then put the bolt through that hole. That might be the easiest thing to do. Try to keep all the funky seams to the back. And then I kind of like the look of the double zip tie here, so I'm gonna put 2 on. We'll go ahead and fit our new painted exhaust shield on there. So these bolts actually have a retainer on the back, this little washer. So we'll drop that in there. Okay, just try to make as small of a cut as possible because this will want to fray a whole bunch. That looks good there. So we'll take our 8mm socket and we'll run the front one in first because that one's not adjustable. And you don't want to torque that down all the way yet. And we'll get the back one here. It's got a little standout on it, so that's a little easier to get to. All right, there we go. I think this turned out really well. Pretty pleased with it. I think you guys can do it yourselves if this is something that you like. We'll get a closer look at it when we put it on the bike in an upcoming episode. All right, that is it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We got a lot done in the last couple days. So don't forget, like and subscribe. Continue following us along because we're going to finish up this XR250 build one piece at a time. We'll see you next week.